Well, welcome. This is the third session of our 3-session memoir workshop. And we learned about what a memoir is and what it isn't. And we've learned how to dig through our memories so that we can get all the material we need. And today we're going to talk about the craft of actually putting words on paper. And this is my favorite part because I love putting words on paper. But before we get to it, we have homework. So let's perhaps share our homework. Does somebody like to start?
Continuing with my journal, the bicycle trip back in 1977. So this is just another daily entry. Dear Susan, today was not much fun. It was freezing this morning, cloudy and with a cold wind all day. Strong, too. Quite the attitude killer. Adirondacks are very green and big on Revolutionary War history. There are signs of famous battle scenes all along the road from Bennington, Vermont to Lake George, New York. In Bennington, there's the Bennington Monument and the battlefield, and in Lake George, there is Fort William Henry. A strong headwind is a bicyclist's worst enemy, and we rode into one for way too much of the day. The two best features of this day-to-day travel have been cold-cut grinders and hot showers. Yeah. We are staying at a campsite near Lake George where there is a view of Black Mountain to the north of the lake. It is a gorgeous setting, but we're near a commercialized area which has a storyland along with many restaurants and motels. Every campsite we have stayed in so far has been deserted. Where is everybody? From Adirondack Park in Warrensburg, New York, Andy.
Thank you. That's great. And you said that more memories come up as you're writing that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It starts to flood.
Anthony?
I wrote, we were somewhere in Oregon, deep, hours from the nearest city. No cars, people, or buildings, just miles of open road and the occasional farm. The old pickup we rented couldn't compete with the July heat. Even with the windows cracked and the AC cranked, we were both sweating and our only food, a box of protein bars, had melted in the center console, reduced to mush. I was 12, going on 13. We were on a mission to locate a river. More specifically, a river that runs through a tiny town called Cottage Grove. The town has significant film history. Aside from being the site of the infamous parade at the end of Animal House, it was also where iconic scenes from Stand By Me were captured, and it's the site of the single most expensive scene in silent film history. In 1926, Buster Keaton crashed an entire train off a bridge into the river for his film The General. The production left the train in the river. Parts were eventually salvaged for scrap during World War II, nearly 20 years later, and afterward, most of the train was believed to have been taken from the river. However, because of the shifting tides, I'm thinking of a word, but and the sheer size of the train, my dad was positive parts were left behind, and together, armed with a metal detector, we were determined to find some.
Fascinating. So you both have written about trips, carved out trips, and that's good fodder for memoir. Are you ready?
My father, John Ross McDonald, stood 6 foot plus, a bit more. First thing you noticed when you shook Dad's hand were his pale blue eyes. He often looked at everything and everyone with uncomfortable duration. Okay, he stared. When younger, his hair was dark, more black than brown, but he kept it so short it's hard now to recall the texture. There was a slight cleft in his chin, barely there and easier to detect in photos. You'd never mistake him for Kirk Douglas, but generally speaking, you might compare him to a less agile, slower talking, firmer chin Donald O'Connor. As he got older, he developed a hitch in his step, and his knees drifted outward as if he'd once been a cowboy. Once that set in, the only movie star you'd compare him to would be Walter Brennan without a mustache.
I think that's really, well, you sort of did a sketch last time, but it's a good character sketch, and I think memoirs are enriched by that. So nicely done. Good detail.
Thank you.
Okay, the first one is batting average. This one's more about the grief experience and processing that. I won't forget the feel of your soft wrist in my hand when you said, "I'll never forget you." Even if there is overwhelm, grief, and compounded loss, I'll use the longing and the loneliness to ask you, what did you love about Dad, about mathematics, about ping pong and poetry? I'll keep smiling in your direction to check on you, looking like a stray cat at my table, because my batting average is high if just once today I remain in connection with you. And then the next one's called Birthday. This is more about my mom's history and loves and interests. And it goes, today I'm going to make sun tea, eat salted peanuts with the shells on, go to a baseball game, or maybe play ping pong at the senior center. But before I do, I'll check out a dozen library books, correct somebody's grammar, and teach Willa the alphabet. And then I'll dress in black jeans, a t-shirt, and don my overstuffed fanny pack, smear too much sunscreen on my face, and go for a 2-mile walk. When I get home, I'll eat peanut butter chocolate ice cream for dinner and watch Brigadoon, because today is my mother's birthday, and that's what she would do.
Thank you. Very nice. I wasn't really sure in the second poem if you were talking about your mother or yourself, but it was nice to draw it together. That was neat.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you. Ordinarily, I don't do this. Put out what we're going to talk about, but maybe because every time I would say anything in the last 2 sessions, 4 heads would go down and 4 pens would begin to take notes. And I would think, oh, I don't think that I have anything that important to say. But I do have some important points to make today about the craft of writing. And don't try to read this now, but it's for later. And if you want to make notes, insist on it, which you don't need to do. They're all here. Okay, so at the start of anything you write, ask yourself 2 questions. Who will read my story, and who is telling the story? And I think the first question is pretty easy. We can come up with, the names of people. But the second question, who is telling the story? Well, what do you mean? I'm telling the story. It's my story. I'm telling it. Which you is going to be talking? Because there are several different voices you could use. You could use first person. There are times when you actually could use third person. And the voice you use depends on who is going to read what you're writing. If you're writing a letter to the IRS to protest the fact that they've billed you $9,000 in error, you're going to have a certain style. But if you're telling a friend about an incident that happened to you in the Market Basket parking lot, you're going to speak in a much more colloquial style. Well, this guy who I didn't know came up to me and he says, that's not the same you who's writing the letter. So to talk about voice, I'm going to introduce this memoir by my good friend Gordon Hall. And I happen to help him with this. And Gordon is a natural storyteller. And his kids had said, write some stories down, Dad. And he, put it off. And then finally, he had a lot of pressure. So he asked me if I'd help him. And I was happy to. He came to my house every day, every Wednesday morning at 10:30. Never 10:25, never 10:35, always at 10:30. And told me a story for an hour. It was wonderful, wonderful year. And we made a deal. He would tell me the story. I would write it down, organizing it and doing a few things, and give him the manuscript, the result. So with the first one, I was a little concerned, and how'd you like it, Gordon? Well, it was all right, he said. It was all right. Only you made me sound like such a ridge runner. Now, I didn't know what a ridge runner was, but I sort of figured it out. Gordon had grown up in rural New Hampshire, and that's the way he talked. And I said, Gordon, I could write your story and put in all fancy words, but your family doesn't want to hear Nancy Parsons. They want to hear your voice. Well, I don't know. And I was insistent. I wasn't backing off on that. And during the year, every now and then, he said, well, it sounds like such a ridgie. He was standing in my kitchen after a year, and he has the book in his hand, and he says, I sound like such a ridge runner. Now, I was vindicated. People who read this book, and a lot of people did because Gordon knows or was related to about no kidding, 200 people. And people said, I could hear Gordon on every page. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is the best thing anybody could have said to me, because we maintained his voice. And that was his memoir and his voice. So, voice. You can look it up online. What's the definition of voice? But I'll give you the most simple one and the best one. And it was an answer that Robert B. Parker, the author of the Spencer novels, gave. Someone had asked him why he thought the Spencer novels, why did people like them so much? And he said, I don't know. I guess they like the way it sounds. The way it sounds is the voice of what you're writing. And a good way to check that is to read it out loud. Ask yourself or ask somebody else, does this sound like me? Does it sound like me? And I think that when you're writing a memoir, I think you do want it to sound like you. Now, the next rule is be prepared to revise. Write, then rewrite. Never be content with the first draft, because you can always do it better. And one of the things that you might do is practice the fine art of murder. I'm going to pass out how to murder, or how to kill your own copy, and you can read this at home. How to murder your copy, but be prepared to write. Now, observe curb appeal. A realtor will tell you that if somebody doesn't like the looks of your house, they're going to drive right on by, and any prospective customer is just going to keep going. It's the same with your memoir. You want to have a provocative title and a provocative first sentence. Now, what do I mean by provocative? Something that entices. And actually, you may have already written your title. The night I knew we had the title to this book, I was talking to Gordon on the phone. And as I said, he's a storyteller and he can't not tell a story. So he was talking about somebody named Phil Terry. And he said, you know Phil Terry? No, I don't. Pauline and I were on the dance floor when this man named Phil Terrian danced his wife up to us. Now, Phil and I had worked on a number of jobs together, and we'd gotten to know each other pretty well. Anyhow, Phil said to Pauline, I'll bet you could tell some stories about this guy. And Pauline looked him right in the eye. You don't know the half of it, she said. And when he told me that anecdote, I knew we had the title of the book. It just works. And of course, everybody who read it said, when are you going to write the other half? Listen to what you say. Now, I'm going to give you another example. Last time, Anthony read us a story about riding his bicycle, taking off the training wheels, riding his bike, and feeling a little unsafe, I guess, and you wanted the training wheels back on. And your dad said no. And it seems to me that that's a metaphor for your whole life. And I can see, Anthony, a memoir that you're going to write that says, "No more training wheels."
That's a good title.
Yeah. Yeah. You can always pay off with a subtitle. My friend Ian Menzies. Ian Menzies was what was he? Well, he was an editor at the Boston Globe, and he used to be a Globe columnist. His column would appear about 3 times a week. And when I saw his column, I'd always want to read it because he had this fine Scottish name, Ian Menzies. And then he retired, so he didn't write anymore, for the Globe. But he was a young man in Scotland when the Second World War started, and he went into the Navy. And he wrote notes. Well, he wrote the memoir as soon as he got out of the Navy, put it in a drawer, and it stayed there for years. Now, Ian got to be 92, and his daughters pushed him and pushed him. "You've got to do something with that memoir, Dad." So through a process that's too boring for me to go into, I got to meet Ian and to work with him, and I was overwhelmed. He said he needed an editor. I'm not an editor, and he insisted that I edit, and I said, "Ian, I can't. I don't do that." But at any rate, I did. His memoir was titled 7 Years in the Royal Navy. And I said, that's not bright enough. We need something more provocative. So this is from Churchill's speech. "We shall not flag or fail. We shall fight in the fields and in the street, in the hills. We shall never surrender." So he knew instantly that that would work. And I always have liked this title. I'm so happy that I got to work with Ian. So Brenda used a subtitle and on this book, and it pays off what the title talks about. Now, I believe that even while you're doing a work in progress, you should title your memoir. Even if you change it later, give it a title now. Because when you do, it becomes an entity. It has a name. Name the thing. My grandmother used to say, if a baby is born, it needs to be named before the end of the day. Otherwise, it's just got a label. The baby. It isn't the baby. It's John or Joanne or somebody. So do yourself a favor and find a title for what you're doing. Come up with it. Listen. So this week, I'd like you to do this. Take a piece of paper, and anytime you think of it, write a title down, and then write another one. Make a list of titles, and at the end of the week, read them and see what you like. As I say, you can always change it later. Your opening sentence should be provocative as well. That's part of the curb appeal. First sentences. Here's some examples. "Where is Papa going with that axe?" said Fern to her mother as they were preparing breakfast. "From my first breath in this world, all I wanted was a good set of lungs and the air to fill them with." And that's how Peace Like a River starts. And this one, he got it all in. Deacon, this is from Deacon King Kong. Deacon Cuffy Lambkin of Five Ends Baptist Church became a walking dead man on a cloudy September afternoon in 1969. I read that and I knew that he had me. I was right into the book. When he was 13, my brother Jim got his arm badly broken at the elbow. And that, of course, is To Kill a Mockingbird. A soft rain slips down through the trees, and the smell of ocean is so strong that it can almost be licked off the air. I read that opening sentence when we were talking about sense in writing, and I love that. Licked. I was reading Thunder Bay. Actually, I was rereading Thunder Bay, which is one of the books by William Kent Kruger. I was reading it a couple of months ago, and I read the opening sentence and closed the book and went over to my computer and wrote down the sentence because it was, in my mind, a perfect sentence. The promise, as I remember it, happened this way. And if you take out the word promise, you could, the da-da-da-da-da-da, as I remember it, happened this way. And for those of us who are telling memoirs, that's an excellent way to begin, and we could borrow it. Regina, you were talking about your daughter, and she objected to Once Upon a Time. What would her first sentence be? Can you repeat that again for us?
Oh, yes. She replaced it with, what if I were to tell you?
Maybe she wouldn't object if you borrowed that to start your memoir. What if I were to tell you about my bicycle trip? Mm-hmm. My bicycle trip, as I remember it, happened this way. So, what we're going to do now for an exercise is take your homework and rewrite the opening sentence. And after you've done that, write it again. So you have 3 sentences, and I'm going to give you a little bit of time to do that. Anthony, 1, 2, or 3, how did you rate them?
I'd have to think about it. It took me some time to think it through. Probably the last one, actually, the third one, just because it was simple. Do you want me to read both?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. The last one I wrote was, we were after a long lost train. I think that's pretty, it summarizes it nicely.
And I think that's provocative. It's short and what? Mm-hmm. You know, it piques interest. Mm-hmm. Nice, nicely done. Anybody else?
How often are fathers remembered for their joy?
Okay, that's good. Read the original.
Does everyone as children remember their father as tall? And then a variation was, does everyone as children compare their father to movie stars? Yeah. I don't know. So playing around, but they didn't seem to go anywhere. So
yeah, I think 4 is the strongest.
Okay.
Also short. Just,
Right.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good introduction.
Okay.
Andy.
I'm not struck by any of my 3. I don't know which one stands out more than the others.
Well, then maybe like Karen, you need to do 4. I mean, there's no magic in 3.
Right.
Just the point is, revise until you have that perfect provocative sentence. Tell us what you have.
I'll read them in the order I wrote them. Many asked me what I was thinking, so I told them this was my plan. I'm talking about the whole book. Mm-hmm. The next one was, sometimes you don't see the challenge or any of the obstacles until you've done it. And then the third one is, the best advice that I can give you is to take it on one day at a time, and that's what we did.
Do you want my opinion?
Sure.
I like the first one, but I would shorten it to just the last part of the sentence. Can you read that?
So I told them this was my plan.
Yeah. And the word so, I pulled this memoir out because the word so, I think, is really important. This is a double memoir about a couple that in retirement became farmers full-time, easily an ulcerative pursuit. We became farmers. Yeah, it communicates. But if you say, so we became farmers, it intimates that there's something that came first. Da-da, 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 da. So we became farmers. It can be offhanded, or so we became farmers. But that short word can have a lot of power. So I think you're close. Were you able to do anything? Because poetry is...
I did. I gave it a try, but it felt like if I changed the first sentence, it really then changed the meaning. So I got kind of deeper and entangled in the rest of it.
Poetry is completely...
Each word is...
Yeah. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try to revise it, but,
Right.
but you have to know that one little word, it can... And then you're 6 stanzas down.
Right.
Yeah, so you get a pass.
Thank you.
But the point being, and I hope that you can see, if you try a few different things, it may make a difference. Another good reason for doing this exercise is it may be key to helping you find your narrative voice. As you revise, it may just lead you to talking more easily. We come now to another rule. Understand the structural position of strength. And this applies to a sentence, it applies to a paragraph, it can apply to a whole article or story. The 2 strong points are the beginning and the end. And of the 2, the end is stronger. So save your emphatic words to the end. Don't bury the lead, but don't bury the end. Let me give you a couple examples. These are the times that try men's souls. That's strong. And that's better than how trying it is to live in these times. Or, these are trying times for men's souls. Soul-wise, these are trying times. These are the times that try men's souls. And another one, in Robert Louis Stevenson's poem that ends, home is the sailor home from the sea and the hunter home from the hill. The beginning sentence, home is the sailor. The sentence that begins that verse, home is the sailor. The weaker beginning would be, the sailor is home. It says the same thing. Home is the sailor. I picked up Judi Dench's new book, Shakespeare, The Man Who Pays the Rent, and it is delightful. But in it, she talks about how Shakespeare put the strong words at the end. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. To be or not to be, that is the question. As you're revising and looking at your work, think about, did I end strong? Or did I bury a strong ending by saying, putting up a weak word after it? When you write a sentence, be aware that the beginning of the sentence is a strong place, and the end is strong also, but it can be a little stronger. So start strong and end strong. And you do the same thing with a paragraph.
So you apply that to a sentence, to a paragraph, to the whole book.
Yep.
Okay. And chapters as well.
Yeah. And while we're talking about strength, let's talk about verbs. Don't rely on adverbs overly much to be effective. Use a strong verb instead. I'm going to give you an example that was brought to me by my daughter. She had been babysitting for neighbors. And in the morning, I asked her, did Mr. Riley walk you home? And she said, Mr. Riley skipped. And that told me three things. That the Rileys probably had a pretty good time at the party, that Mr. Riley was probably a little inebriated, and that my daughter got home safely. And I have such a colorful memory of that. Skipped. Check your writing. Check your verbs. Pay attention. And check your adverbs too. Did I put in too many veries? Or very, very? Okay. Now, consider using dialogue in your memoir. It adds some life to your story. It can move the narration forward. Instead of having to write a whole couple of sentences about something, your character can come in and say something that, in effect, shortens. It's like shorthand for your script. When Fern says, "Where's Papa going with that axe?" E.B. White, who wrote it, could have begun by writing, "A litter of pigs was born last night, and it was pig, and one was a runt, and had to, do something with it." But no, "Where's Papa going with that axe?" gets us right smack into the action. So it shortens what you have to say. It increases readability by giving eye rest to the page. It breaks up a whole, bunch of dense type. Just makes it more friendly to read. And it's fun to write. Once you start writing dialogue, you sort of get into the swing of it. And it's economical. It can accomplish in a few words what a lot of words can't. And now I would expect one of you to say, "Oh, but I don't remember what they said." Or, "What if I don't have it right?" Ignore that. This is your memoir. You can write it however you wish. If you're writing about someone you know how they speak. You can come close enough. Now, Anthony, you're a script writer.
That's one way to put it.
Yes. And so you understand about writing the whole thing in script, in dialogue, because actors obviously talk to each other. There may be some regular type about stage direction, but you can accomplish a whole story simply in dialogue.
It reads much faster, too. It's much less daunting to read a screenplay.
The action moves along. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So what we're going to do now is take the homework that you had and rewrite it using dialogue. Write it in dialogue. Okay. Even if you're not finished, it's fine. Was that fun? Andy, did you have a good time?
Yeah, it's making my shorter paragraph much longer because of the dialogue.
Well, yeah, but why don't you read what you wrote?
I woke in the morning and quickly surmised that our day was not going to be as much fun. I saw that Dan's eyes were open. Dan, do you hear the wind? Yeah, I'm not too psyched about it, and I'm already freezing. We're going to be tested today. We rose and put on all the clothes we were carrying just to stay warm. My riding shorts and t-shirt were covered up with my sweatpants, sweatshirt, and windbreaker. As we started off, I said to Dan, "Winter gloves for my hands would be kind of nice right now." Dan replied, "Hopefully it gets warmer later on."
Yes, it does become a little longer, but it's more there. And you don't always have to say, "Dan replied." We understand that there are two of you.
Oh, okay.
And in those instances, we can, infer who's speaking.
All right.
But it's fun to write dialogue, I think, when you allow yourself to do it. And you didn't have any problem coming up with what Dan would say.
Right.
There you are.
Right. So,
Consider it.
yeah, he
Or
has-
not, but
right,
consider
he has a
it.
certain way to say things, and I'm not sure I captured that. I may have put my own voice in his response, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Does it matter? It's your memoir. Okay.
Oh, okay. Dad, why are you staring at me? I ask him. I was staring? Never mind, I say. Looks like your hair's getting long. Is it time for Mom to give you a haircut? He looked around to check out his reflection in the window. You think so? I love it when she cuts my hair. To cut his hair, Mom gets out her tools, spreads a plastic apron around his shoulders, and lightly snips the scissors around his head until he falls asleep. He always falls asleep. When she's done with you, you look like Kirk Douglas, I say, and we both laugh at the comparison.
Thank you. Did you enjoy doing that?
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it had great immediacy. You know, I was right there.
Right.
More so than when it was just straight dialogue. Yeah. He became more real for me. Yeah. Regina?
So I gave it a try. I did have dialogue in the batting average poem where I said, what do you love about Dad, about mathematics? But I tried to turn it into dialogue at the start and say, what did you love about Dad, about mathematics, about ping pong and poetry, I asked. And then have her saying, I don't know. And then trying to continue with the rest of the poem. I kept smiling in her direction while she looked like a stray cat at my table. I played around with that, but it's hard to rearrange.
Yeah. But if you're trying to revise something, again, it's difficult. But if you're starting fresh, and that starting an opening in dialogue, I think is very often works very well. So anyway, nice. Sir.
I said, we're real close now, yet there was nothing in sight. What's the name of this town? Cottage Grove. And why'd they choose this town? I don't know, but they also filmed Animal House here. Have you seen that one yet? I said, no. Is that one about a zoo or something? Yeah, something like that. Anyway, the river runs right through the town, and we just need to find the bridge they crashed it off of.
Good. It moves along nicely. And you're right there. Or I was. So it was good. You don't have to write everything in dialogue, but don't dismiss it either. Try writing a foreword. I like forewords. These books all have forewords, and it explains a little bit about what the book is about or why it was written, where it's going. And I think that's helpful for people reading it. But it's also helpful for the memoirist. So you might try writing a foreword, even before you get very far with your memoir, because it can focus you, you know. I wrote this because my children wanted to know stories about me. And that's what Gordon explains in his memoir. And in this memoir, the foreword goes, at a time when the number of farms in America was dwindling at an alarming rate, we enrolled our small agricultural operation in the USDA Farm Service Agency database and prepared to write farmers on the occupation line of the IRS form. And so optimistically, with one small holding, we bucked the trend. We became farmers. So that comes to the end of my rules. I could have written more rules, but I didn't. Consider these as you go forward and do some work. And some of these things you may find useful and some not. Okay, let's do a roundup. By this point, each of you should be able to answer, who's telling the story? that you're starting, if the memoir that you're starting to write? You? Okay. Yeah, in your own voice. Great. And I would ask the question, what form is the memoir going to take? But I think I know the answers. Nobody's writing a memory dump, for example, where you just write the paragraphs and number them. You've all in traditional form and going along. That's good. I encourage you to write an opening and keep at it, and to write a foreword, if that works. How do you see your memoir? Take it down the road a little farther. What do you see? How does it look? How are you going to present it?
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay. This memoir is published. Not all of them are. Anthony and I were talking before we started today about a woman I've worked with in the past who's writing a memoir for her grandchildren. And she's very clear, it is just for her grandchildren. And she has put her memoir into binders, loose leaf binders. Very nice ones, though. They're purple. Purple is her signature color. So she has these purple binders, and she's on the second. And she's adding things that the children will want to know about. And she's doing a very professional job. She has gone online to learn how to do a professional typeset look in Word. God bless her, because it's not easy. But it's a very professional setup. And that shows that she respects what she's done. It doesn't matter how you do it, but just visualize how you want it to look. And visualize somebody picking it up and reading it, and their pleasure, if it's a relative, and surprise, maybe. Well, how would Tracy react if you said, this is a memoir. It's called such and such and such. My travels with, what's his name?
Dan.
My travels with Dan. Can you imagine her response?
Oh, Dad.
That's probably.
Do I have to read this?
Anyway, I have enjoyed working with all of you. And I'm going to tell you one more story. I was standing in a pulpit in a church in Wells, Maine, giving a eulogy for my friend Margie. And believe me, I would have rather been on Margie's porch with a gin and tonic in my hand rather than in her church giving a eulogy. Now, I have heard some really boring eulogies in my time, and I decided I wasn't going to do one. So I invited the congregation to join me in looking at a virtual photo album of snapshots of Margie. And I picked 4 different scenes and described them. And like in the first one, Margie is standing in her kitchen. She has no shoes on, and she's ladling clams out of a big pot into the sink. And I went on to describe the dogs and cats running around in the background, and it was a party, and all the people reaching around to get in the refrigerator and all of that. And came up with a couple more snapshots. And while I was talking, I was very distracted by a woman who was sitting in the center aisle in the back of the church. And she was in a wheelchair, so that's probably why she was in the center aisle. But she was a large woman, and she had a very bright dress, gaudy colors going in all directions. And her hair was all piled up, and I giving this eulogy and saying in part of my mind, did Margie know this person? Well, I finished the eulogy, and I sat down, listened to Ave Verum Corpus, very nice. I went back to the collation afterward, and this woman came zooming up to me in her chair, and she put on the brakes. She looked at me and she said, "You are a storyteller." And she saw, it was like an accusation. And I was taken back, but I said, yes, I am. Well, she said, I'm a storyteller too. And we chatted a little bit, and she did a 180 and zoomed away. And I have been grateful to that woman ever since, because she told me something about myself that I really didn't know. I mean, yeah, I suppose I knew I told stories, but she gave me a label. She anointed me. You are a storyteller, and it has made a difference. And now I'm going to anoint each of you. You are storytellers. And for that reason, you have an obligation, a responsibility to tell those stories. So write them down, keep them. Thank you. That's it.